I've been married to Ernesto for 3 years. And he flaunts around with one woman after another. I'm so tired of dealing with them. After he got together with my sister, I personally threw a divorce agreement at him. He asked, on our wedding night, "You said I could be with anyone. Why not your sister?" I just smiled and shook my head. Sorry. My first love is back. Who wouldn't prefer the genuine article over a dirty and ill-mannered substitute? As soon as I arrived at the banquet, Grace gloated and looked behind me. My brother didn't come? He doesn't like this kind of occasion. I took a glass of wine and casually brushed off the topic. Grace spouted, clearly not believing me. Stop pretending. Today is the 90th birthday of the Yun family's elder. A mourning eel. If my brother doesn't show up today, my mom will skin you alive. Ernesto is related to the Yun family. Now the Yun family has great power. And even Ernesto's family has to try hard to curry favor with them. Thanks for the reminder. I smiled sweetly, looking extremely calm on the surface. But I was still constantly making phone calls. And each one ended up with no answer, and then I hung up. Grace seemed to be in a good mood after seeing this. Since you're so pitiful, I'll give you a piece of information. Sister Vivian is back. My hand holding the phone froze. No wonder. If it was Vivian, everything made sense. Grace pointed at me. I think Vivian should have married into our family back then. If her hand hadn't been injured and she hadn't gone abroad to recuperate, there would be no chance for you. I coldly slapped her hand away. Even if her hand wasn't injured, this marriage wouldn't have been hers. There was still no answer from the other end of the phone. But two figures at the entrance of the hall instantly attracted everyone's attention. The person I hadn't seen for a week showed up at the dinner party with another woman. And the woman beside him was my so-called sister. The fake daughter who had occupied my place for 18 years. Now she was hiding behind my husband. With an innocent look on her pretty face. Just as innocent as she was when she framed me 3 years ago. People around were watching me like I was a show. This is interesting. Her husband and her sister are attending the banquet together. But if I were him, I'd also choose Vivian. After all, she was only brought back to the Amara family from the countryside a few years ago. Compared with Vivian, they're worlds apart. Exactly. I think she shouldn't have married Ernesto in the first place. This is really embarrassing for her. When Vivian saw me, she smiled sweetly at me, trotted over, and hooked her arm around mine. Sister, I didn't tell you I was coming back. You're not angry, are you? Sometimes I really think she has no shame. After all, we had a falling out 3 years ago. How can she still have the nerve to call me sister? Sure enough, the next second, she stopped smiling and gave me a provocative look where others couldn't see. Sister, if I were to fall, what do you think Ernesto would do? I don't know what he'd do, but I suggest you have some self-respect. It's been 3 years. And she's still trying to disgust me. I pulled my arm out of her embrace. And Vivian took the opportunity to fall to the ground. Her hand caught on the corner of the nearby table, scratching a bloody mark, with blood beads oozing out. She looked pitiful on the ground. I didn't expect her to still use this trick after 3 years. Vivian, it's been 3 years. Do you think anyone will still believe? Before I could finish, a slap landed on my face. There was a loud slap. I covered my face and stared blankly at Ernesto. He was holding Vivian, looking at me with an unhappy expression. Amara, that's enough. Ernesto looked at me with an unhappy expression. Her hand hasn't fully recovered yet. Vivian was lying in Ernesto's arms, crying pitifully. In the eyes of others, she was the perfect image of a victim, delicate and kind. Even though she could no longer play the piano after her hand was injured. But once she sat in front of the piano, she was their holy and unattainable piano princess. People around were blaming me. In their eyes, I was a stain on high society. At the banquet when I was brought back to the Amara family from the countryside at the age of 18, people deliberately egged me on to perform the piano. After all, my mother was a pianist, and my sister had performed for the orchestra in high school, and I could do nothing. When I was being ridiculed, even my so-called parents didn't stand up for me. Instead, they praised Vivian's piano talent. The 3 of them, mother and daughter, sat in front of the piano playing a four-hand piece, and the father stood by, enjoying the praise from others. And I stood on the outermost edge of the crowd, coldly watching this welcome ceremony prepared for me. When they gave Vivian birthday wishes, no one mentioned that it was my birthday today. No. After 3 years of marriage to Ernesto, he flaunts around with one woman after another outside. I've been so busy dealing with his mistresses that my hands are numb. And now he's rekindled his old relationship with my sister. And all I get is that's enough. Yes, I think I've really had enough. I looked at his familiar eyebrows and eyes. But there was no longer any trace of that person. I found my voice. Ernesto. It's over between us. After leaving the banquet, I didn't go back to the villa I shared with Ernesto. As if I had long known that there would be such a day. I bought a house of less than 50 square meters before getting married. Compared to the big villa, this place was pitifully small. But this warm little nest was completely different from the cold and icy villa. I looked at myself in the mirror. The red mark on my face from the slap, and the red marks at the corners of my eyes made me look extremely embarrassed. It was very similar to the night of our wedding. I sat on the bed, neatly spreading out the white wedding veil. My face so red that it seemed to be dripping blood. And when he saw me, he showed a look of disgust. Amara, your sister can no longer play the piano because of you. How can you have the nerve? My face instantly turned pale. My self-esteem was easily trampled under his feet. He didn't say anything. But his whole being seemed to be saying 3 words, don't be cheap. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and called my lawyer. Help me draw up a divorce agreement, and then send a copy to Ernesto. The next day, I was called back home. At the dining table, my father looked unhappy. I heard you had an argument with Vivian at the banquet yesterday? You're the elder sister and should be more tolerant of her. Every time I'm called back, it's this kind of unprovoked accusation. I put down my chopsticks. I'm not her sister. And you know very well whether she's my sister or not. Why isn't she your sister? We raised her with our own hands. My father looked at me with a look of being exasperated at my failure. Can't you learn from Vivian? She's been well educated and considerate since she was a child, while I grew up in the countryside, dropped out of school in senior 2. And in your eyes, I'm a social outcast. I continued to fill in for him. My unremarkable resume was like the mud on the soles of their feet and their eyes. Dirty and unseemly. My mother tried to smooth things over and picked up a shrimp for me. Have a good meal. You two don't quarrel as soon as you meet. This is the shrimp your mother made. Try it quickly. Vivian came down the stairs. Sister is back. My mother beckoned her. Vivian, come down quickly. Mom made your favorite longjing shrimp. She came down and hugged my mother. Mom still loves me the most. I haven't eaten such delicious food abroad. My mother gently tapped her nose and smiled affectionately. I looked at the shrimp in the bowl. Didn't eat a bite of the meal. Picked up my bag. And turned to leave. My mother chased me to the door. You're not staying for dinner again. Vivian hasn't been back for 3 years. Can't we have a meal together as a family? I refused her flatly. No. Why not? I'm allergic to shrimp. The kind that could kill me with just a little bit. My mother was stunned. Why didn't you say so earlier? It's been 7 years since I was 18. 7 years in exchange for why didn't you say so earlier? I retorted her. Then what is Vivian allergic to? She can't eat potatoes and. As soon as she said that, my mother realized something was wrong. Instead, I smiled brightly. Yes, Vivian can't eat potatoes. Can't drink milk. And can't eat peanuts. I even know these because in these 7 years, every time you changed the servant, you would specifically tell them these things. Even when she wasn't at home, you would give instructions. But you don't know anything about me. There was a look of apology in my mother's eyes. She wanted to say something. But after holding it in for a long time, she couldn't say anything. Because she really didn't know anything. Amara. Mom. I interrupted her. I have something else to do. So I'll be leaving. I didn't want to listen. It wasn't anger. It's just that these things really didn't matter to me anymore. I no longer needed them. After Ernesto received my divorce agreement, He immediately called me. On the other end of the phone, his tone sounded very unhappy. Amara. What do you mean? I was very calm. Sign it. After you sign it, we'll have nothing to do with each other. Ernesto snorted. You were the one who wanted to marry me in the first place. Now you want a divorce just like that? I will never let you have your way. I thought Ernesto was really strange. He had thrown me many divorce agreements in these 3 years. I threw each one into the trash can. Now that I've signed one, he doesn't recognize it. Ernesto. You're still angry now. When you calm down and think it over. Isn't this what you've always wanted? Before I could finish, the phone hung up. It didn't matter. I knew he would figure it out. 2 days later, he called me again. It was noisy on the other end of the phone. His voice also carried the smell of alcohol. Amara. Come over. I have the divorce agreement for you. I rushed to the bar. When I opened the private room, Ernesto was extremely drunk. He was holding a hostess in his arms. I thought I still couldn't fit into this kind of occasion. Seeing Ernesto casually holding an unknown woman, drinking the wine they fed him, I felt a wave of nausea. The divorce agreement. Ernesto curled his lips, his tone mocking. Amara. You don't really think I'll give it to you, do you? I just want to play with you bit by bit. I like seeing you disappointed. I won't give you anything you want. I was in a trance. His eyebrows and eyes no longer overlapped with the boy in my memory who said he would lead me out of the encirclement. Right. He was never that person from the beginning to the end. I looked at him, my eyes gradually turning cold, and said to him, disgusting. Ernesto was stunned. What did you say? I said you're so dirty. Ernesto instantly wiped the smile off his face and shouted at me. Amara. I didn't intend to waste any time. Give me the divorce agreement as soon as possible. With a bang, the wine bottle grazed my shoulder and landed on the ground. The girls present were startled by this sudden turn of events and let out screams. The wine spread around my feet. My shoulder was numb with pain. My nose felt a bit sour. But I didn't want to cry. Ernesto suddenly became sober. He stood up abruptly and looked at me. Amara. I didn't. Just as I was about to speak, I heard a deep voice from behind. What are you standing there for? Just smash the bottle on his face. I froze on the spot immediately. It was as if I was struck by lightning. I couldn't move at all. In my line of sight, a face gradually overlapped with the one in my memory. Someone in the private room said, Neil is here. Is it the Neil from the capital city? Didn't they say he's not close to the Young family? His maternal grandparents? Why is he here? What do you know? The Neil family has a complex and extensive lineage. Neil managed to secure the position of the head of the Neil family in just 5 years. I don't believe he did it without the help of the Young family. And he's the only one among the younger generation of the Young family. Maybe the family property will end up in his hands in the end. Amidst the jostling figures, an undercurrent was surging. And I thought of the arrogant young man from that year. He blocked the entrance of the alley on his bicycle, with one leg firmly blocking the way. His arrogant appearance intimidated the small-time hooligans behind me. I looked at the young man I had only met a few times. What are you doing here? The weather is quite nice today. His words seemed irrelevant. I didn't bother to ask further. So I came to back you up. Before returning to the Amara family, I was just a parentless child in a small town. Grandma always said I didn't seem like I belonged there. She was beating clothes with a wooden stick by the river. And I was behind her, giving her a back rub. Every time at this moment, she would shout at the top of her voice. Our Amara is a snow-white baby. Look at this fair little face. No other girl in town is as pretty as her. There were people doing laundry all around. I felt a bit shy. Grandma. No one else praises their own child like you do. Every time she would straighten her back. I'm not boasting. There's really no girl in this town as pretty as her. And even if there is, they're not as good at studying as my girl. Aunt Wang next door said. Come on. Old lady. We know your Amara's pretty. But she doesn't look like you at all. Grandma pouted and said with a serious expression. It's a good thing she doesn't look like me. If she did, she wouldn't be this pretty. Everyone burst out laughing. I buried my face low. And the blush on my face spread from my cheeks to my ears. I poked Grandma's back. Grandma, I want to eat sweet and sour pork ribs for lunch. Sure. If my Amara wants the stars, Grandma will pick them for you. Although I was shy, I hammered her back even more vigorously. I don't want the stars. I only want Grandma. So it's hard for me to recall the moment she fell in front of me that day. The sudden fainting. The sudden convulsions. As if she knew her time was running out. Lying on the hospital bed, she kept murmuring, Amara, in her mouth. I cried and asked her, Grandma, does it hurt? And she looked at me, repeating only one sentence over and over again. What will happen to Amara in the future? Amara is going to college. I didn't manage to study hard and get into a good university as Grandma had hoped. I was suspended from school in the second semester of my sophomore year of high school. Aunt Wang advised me not to be idle and uneducated. Actually, I was very busy, working part-time jobs to earn money. Every single thing was important at that time. I simply didn't have the time to go bad. When Neil moved in across from my house, I was just about to go out with my backpack. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't understand why someone would move in at this time. I rode my bike to help at the breakfast store, busy from before sunrise until it was bright. Until it was almost time to close up. A boy said, I want a bowl of water, milled soy milk. It was the boy from the morning. I checked the time. If I waited for him to finish eating, I would definitely be late for my next part-time job. I lied. We're out. His calm eyes glanced at me for a bit longer. And he pointed to the lid I had closed. Aren't there still some? You don't want to do business? Before I could finish. The next second, the boss's wife's voice rang in my ear. Amara, I knew you had bad intentions. Don't come to work from tomorrow. The boss came out to mediate. Come on. It's not a big deal. The boss's wife pointed at him and cursed. Don't think I don't know what's on your mind. You just think she's good looking. You're talking nonsense. She's just a kid. Just like a butterfly flapping its wings in South America causing a tornado in Texas. I lost my next job because of being late. The boss grumbled. You're late for days out of 5 in a week. Even if you were a god, I wouldn't dare to hire you. I walked aimlessly on the street and seemed to bump into someone. I said sorry. But the person didn't leave. He smiled and waved at me. What a coincidence. Before he could finish looking at him, my tears started to pour out. He was flustered immediately. Hey, headings of self-marriage session. Don't cry. Thinking that I had lost 2 jobs because of this person, I cried even more sadly. It's all your fault. All your fault. I didn't want to have any involvement with him. After that day, I started to live a normal life. The only change was that I got a troublesome neighbor. The songs he played every morning were very noisy. After work, as soon as I unlocked my bike, I saw a group of girls sitting on the steps. Their school uniforms worn haphazardly. The girl in the front looked at me with eyes like a venomous snake in the dark. I sped up unlocking the bike. It seemed that if I hesitated for a moment, I wouldn't be able to get rid of the suffocating feeling of being pushed into the sink and the pain of being slapped in the face again and again. A female voice came from above. Oh, isn't this the top student from No. 1 middle school? How come you've ended up serving dishes? Of course she was expelled from school. Otherwise, why would she be so miserable? A girl asked knowingly. Why would a top student be expelled? Of course it's because of school violence. She had the nerve to attack our Jewel. I pushed my bike to leave. But they held down my shoulder. Don't go. Old classmate. Don't you want to chat? I shook off her hand. We have nothing to talk about. Jewel impatiently pressed the cigarette in her hand onto my coat. Bitch. Don't be ungrateful. I smelled the familiar smell of cigarettes and laughed at myself. I couldn't escape this time either. Suddenly, a bicycle rushed out and blocked the entrance of the alley, with one leg firmly blocking the way. His arrogant appearance intimidated the small-time hooligans behind. I looked at the young man I had only met twice. What are you doing here? The weather is quite nice today. He left his bike and walked slowly in front of me. I asked him, so? Can I back you up? Jewel looked at Neil with disgust. Who are you? Neil had a menacing look. I don't have the habit of not hitting women. You can come and try. Jewel glanced at Neil. Then looked at me with deep mockery. Your ability to rely on men really grows day by day. Neil exuded a sense of authority without getting angry. He looked at her coldly. Say one more word and see what happens. In the end, Jewel didn't dare to do anything. She glared at me. You wait for me. As we walked on the road, after a long time, I said to him, thank you. What they did belongs to school violence. I nodded gently. Yeah. Why didn't you resist? I smiled unfairly. I did resist. And that's why I was expelled. There was surprise in his eyes. After a moment of silence, I asked him first. Why did you come here alone? Although the small town has a nice scenery. Who would come here alone for 10 days or half a month? Exile. My dad is having a reunion with his illegitimate son and his family. I'm just in the way there. It's better for me to find a place with mountains and water to enjoy myself alone. He asked me. What about you? Why are you alone too? I looked at him calmly and said. Wandering. In the bar. Neil was like crazy. Punching Ernesto again and again. Damn it. The person I don't even dare to touch. You threw a wine bottle at her. What the hell are you? The private room was in chaos. The sound of wine bottles falling to the ground mixed with the girls' screams. My mind went blank. Why was Neil here? I don't know who shouted. Stop. Stop fighting. Ernesto's face is covered in blood. Hurry up and stop him. If something happens to Ernesto, none of us can bear the consequences. I quickly snapped out of my memories and stepped forward to hug Neil's arm. Neil. Stop hitting. Get out of the way. I want to show him the consequences of bullying you. I couldn't help but feel a pang in my nose. I really hadn't heard this sentence for a long time. I looked into his eyes, which overlapped with the eyes of the young man who said he would protect me forever in my memory. With red eyes, I said, Neil. My hand hurts. He threw the Ernesto in his hand to the ground, then pulled me with a sullen face and said, let's go to the hospital. When Neil was unhappy, he liked to keep a straight face. From the way their chair when I finished applying medicine at the hospital and he sent me back. He didn't say a word. I looked at his face. Just like when I was found by those girls again at 18 and I didn't ask him for help. When I went home at night, he saw the footprints on the back of my white shirt and the bruises on my face that even the mask couldn't cover. He didn't say anything. But the young man's face was terrifyingly gloomy. I sat at the dining table, and he went to the kitchen and put the cooked hot pot noodles in front of me. I lowered my head, carefully took off my mask, and picked up my chopsticks to eat. The first bite was so spicy that it almost killed me. I had been living with Neil for a month, and he promised to cook for me every day in exchange for rent. He knew from the first meal that I couldn't eat spicy food. He must have made it this spicy on purpose today. My face was numb from the spicinces, but I still silently ate it. But I really couldn't take it anymore. The chili got stuck in my throat. It hurt so much that tears streamed down my face. And no matter how much I coughed, it didn't help. Neil quickly handed me ice water and gently patted my back to help me breathe. Are you stupid? If it's too spicy, why didn't you tell me? Can't you tell me when something happens? Do you always have to deal with it alone? I was stunned. Grandma had said this to me too. The young man in front of me frowned, his eyes full of worry. Neil. Can I rely on you? I turned to look at the young man's sincere gaze. My heart was pounding like a drum. I wanted to take a gamble. I hugged him tightly. Neil. They hit me. It hurts so much. I don't say a word, and you don't utter even one syllable. It was hard for me to imagine that the first words Neil said to me after all these years were these. With a tone of complaint, I said self-mockingly. I thought you were going to ask why I left without saying goodbye back then. I'm more concerned about what you've been through these years than that. I looked at the documents he placed aside. Didn't your assistant just bring you the information about me from these years? He pressed his cheek irritably. It seems you haven't been doing well. I'm the real daughter who was wrongly reported. Yet my parents clearly favor that sister who is no blood relation to me. I'm clearly Ernesto's wife. Yet that family. I fell silent. not knowing how to explain it to him. Saying it doesn't matter seems to fake. Seeing my silence, he asked again. So when are you getting divorced? Soon. Vivian came back, and she rekindled her old relationship with Ernesto. Naturally. They won't need me soon. And I'm no longer interested in this game. Do you need my help? I smiled. What? After all these years? President Neil wants to get back together with his ex-girlfriend like me? Neil stared at me intently. Is that possible? My heart skipped a beat. I was afraid he was serious. After all, he said he would teach those girls who bullied me a lesson. And in the end, they were all expelled from school. I pretended to joke. That's not possible. If you take advantage of my vulnerable state now, you'd be a male mistress. I challenged him. What? Does President Neil want to be a male mistress? There's always a certain pride in Neil. Perhaps as an heir cultivated in an orthodox wealthy family, he sometimes exudes arrogance and wildness. Sure enough, Neil's face turned dark, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Then he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes. Give me a chance." My face froze. My heart was in a panic. I tightly clenched my palms to stay calm and coldly refused. No. After the car stopped, I immediately got up and left with my bag. Amara. Neil got out of the car and called me from behind. I'm serious. I turned around, my eyes looking straight at him over the surroundings. Neil. I'm serious too. Anyone is possible. But not you. I pretended to be relaxed and said. I said it back then. Right? I don't like you. I'm just grateful for the happiness you brought me during that time. Nothing more. Seeing you today is just like an old friend's reunion. Thank you for taking me to the hospital. I'll transfer the money to you later. After saying that, I turned around and left without looking back. Back then, having concealed my obsession, Neil's grandfather found me and said just one sentence that made me waver. Our family has chosen a girl of equal status for Neil even before he was born. And I was clearly not that girl. Even if it weren't for this accident, I might never have seen them in my life. At that time, I just felt there was a huge gap, but after really integrating into this circle, I realized that this gap couldn't be filled by just hard work. It requires the talents, money, and status accumulated by generations of this family. I didn't expect my dear sister to hook up with someone so soon. Can't wait. Huh. Vivian was wearing a tweed outfit, with delicate makeup on her small face. I looked at her with a sullen face. What are you doing here? She raised her chin triumphantly and smiled. Of course. I came to see my dear sister. I didn't expect you to still be living such a miserable life after all these years. This neighborhood doesn't look high-end at all. So? She came close to me, smiling like a winner. So, sister, you were so useless 3 years ago. Why are you still the same after 3 years? All of this was because of you 3 years ago. Maybe. After all, my hand was smashed by the piano. You were right beside me at that time. It's hard to believe it was anyone else but you. I asked her. So, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. Do you regret not being able to play the piano anymore? She held her belly and laughed. What's there to regret? I never liked it in the first place. It was just my mother-in-law who forced it on me. In fact, I don't have such great talent. She made me work hard for so many years, only to be easily crushed by those with real talent in the end. So why shouldn't I give up? And it was because of you that my hand was ruined. Your mother must be heartbroken. Right? Will she be close to you again? I'll always be like her first love in her heart. She really played her cards well. My mother gave up her dream of piano performance after getting married. She pinned all her hopes on Vivian. And Vivian just wanted to let her biological daughter destroy her dream, so that she could never be close to me again. Vivian, what? You should know that the story from 3 years ago is over. Now I'm the real daughter of the Amara family. Mrs. Ernesto. Well, you're nothing. Vivian's face instantly turned cold. Don't be complacent. Ernesto will divorce you sooner or later. I instead laughed. Oh. Then what are you doing here today? Let me guess. You heard the news that I'm getting divorced from Ernesto, but found out that it still hasn't happened after so many days. Right? She became curious. Amara, can you stop pestering Ernesto? He doesn't like you. It seems I really guessed right. She's getting anxious. I think you're mistaken. I gave him the signed divorce agreement on the first day you came back. Vivian was stunned. What? Can't you understand? I signed it long ago. It's him who hasn't signed. I smiled and retorted. Do you think he doesn't want to divorce? Before Vivian left in a huff, I gave her another sentence. Vivian, if Ernesto really likes you, tell him to get divorced quickly. After she left, I took out the voice recorder from my bag. Vivian's words were clearly recorded on it. I bought this voice recorder on the day Vivian came back. I pressed the button as soon as I saw her. Vivian, you're wrong. I'm not the Amara from 3 years ago. And I've never thought of letting the matter from 3 years ago go. Early the next morning, I went to the piano class. There's another thing Vivian was wrong about. That is, I've never said I can't play the piano. Perhaps it's really in the genes. When I was a child, my parents took me to the interest class. I could play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, just by watching other kids play it once. After that, I kept taking piano lessons until my parents had a car accident. Then I lived with my grandma. Practicing the piano every day turned into going once a week. I didn't touch the piano for a year after Grandma passed away. Sometimes I even thought that maybe because of the piano, my loved ones left me one by one. Later, Neil moved to my neighborhood. Seeing the dusty piano in the corner, he said, "My mom also gave me a piano. I didn't like it at first. But later I always wanted to play it." I asked him why. He said, "After my mom passed away, I always felt that she was watching me every time I played the piano." The piano was sprinkled with a layer of broken light. I couldn't help but think of the scene every New Year when the whole family sat together listening to me play Happy New Year. My mom would hold me and say, "Our Amara is amazing." My dad would want to take me to buy candied haws. And my grandma would pull my dad and say that Amara had a decayed tooth. And today we should eat Amara's favorite sweet and sour spare ribs. After listening to me play, the interest class teacher asked timidly, "Are you here to apply for a piano teacher position? I haven't played for many years. My hands are a bit rusty. Then can you come and work as a part-time teacher here? Our last teacher just left. You can practice the piano for free here." "No, no. We can pay you." I thought for a while and nodded in agreement. After signing the contract, I became a part-time teacher at the interest class. These days have been extremely peaceful. I go to work steadily every day, and spend the rest of the time reading and practicing the piano. It felt like I was saying goodbye to my previous life. Until I met someone while practicing the piano. My so-called mother. She stared in a daze at my hands jumping on the piano keys. "Amara, you can play the piano?" In the coffee shop, my mom picked up the coffee and looked at me. "When did you learn to play the piano? You play really well." "A long time ago. I've been learning since I was a child." My mom smiled awkwardly. "I've never heard you mention it." After saying this, the atmosphere became even more awkward. Because we hardly ever had any conversations. Almost every time I had something to talk to her about, Vivian's matters always attracted her more. And by the time she came after I dealt with things I no longer needed her, she would always say to my dad, "Amara seems to be distant from us." I looked at the untouched coffee in front of me and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll be leaving." My mom quickly said, "Amara, where do you live now? I heard you're going to divorce Ernesto." I caught the information in her words and retorted, "You know why I'm getting divorced from Ernesto, right?" She hesitated. I suddenly felt like laughing. She clearly knew that I was married to Ernesto. Yet she still indulged Vivian and Ernesto being together. I thought I didn't have much affection for this family. But when she so blatantly favored Vivian, I still felt hurt. I suppressed the soreness in my throat. "Do you know that I'm married to Ernesto?" My mom showed an embarrassed expression. "We've all seen your relationship. He doesn't love you. So you think they should have been together 3 years ago. Instead of pushing me out when the Ernesto family urgently needed an alliance by marriage." My mom fell silent. Obviously, having toffel wag say. What I said was what she was thinking. It's really ridiculous. I didn't have to marry Ernesto. Just because he resembled Neil wasn't enough for me to marry him. The Gray-Samara families, alliance by marriage. At that time, Vivian went abroad, and the old master of the Ernesto family was in critical condition. If no one from the Amara family married into their family, this marriage would surely fall into someone else's hands. At that time, they couldn't sleep at night. In fact, the Amara family was already an empty shell. I softened my heart. Maybe after I got married, I could be closer to this family. But I didn't expect that my soft-heartedness led to such a result. I picked up my bag and stood up. Mom, this is the last time I'll call you. Goodbye. I stumbled back home, only to find Ernesto waiting for me at the door. So you still know to come back. I don't know which man you've been fooling around with, I said weakly. Ernesto, I'm very tired now. I'm not in the mood to argue with you. He looked at my pale face with some concern, and reached out to touch my forehead. What's wrong with you? Why do you look so bad? I slapped his hand away. I don't need your concern. His face turned stiff. Who cares about you? I'm just afraid I can't get divorced from you. Then sign the divorce agreement and give it to me. I didn't bring it with me today. I asked him feebly. So what are you doing here today? He taunted. Of course. I came to see how you're doing after leaving me. I'm relieved to see you're not doing well. So childish. I turned to leave, but my head was dizzy. I stumbled after just one step. Ernesto quickly supported me. Hey, you have a fever. Can't you take care of yourself? Before I could say anything, a female voice came from behind me. Troubles really come all at once. Vivian rushed between Ernesto and me, separating us. Tears welled up in her eyes as if about to fall. Brother Ernesto, why are you with her? Ernesto was clearly more patient with her than with me. He said softly to her. You go back first. Vivian wouldn't listen. She said recklessly. Sister, Brother Ernesto and I are truly in love. Please give us your blessing. I was annoyed by her act. I said. You're crazy. Vivian blinked her eyes. I'm not. I'm pregnant. I suddenly became a bit more awake. Vivian did this on purpose. I looked at Ernesto. His face remained normal, clearly indicating that he knew about it. I could no longer show him any kindness. Tomorrow afternoon, meet me at Blue Card CAF. Sign the divorce agreement. I didn't expect a hint of panic to appear on Ernesto's face. He tried to explain. Amara. I waved my hand to interrupt him. Ernesto, if you don't come, I'll file a lawsuit directly. Since we can't reach an agreement, we'll go through legal procedures. I opened the door, slammed it shut, and isolate them outside. The moment the door closed, I fell heavily to the ground. In a daze, I dialed a phone number. Who was it again? When I opened my eyes, I smelled the disinfectant. I was in the hospital. Who brought me here? Awake? I turned my head and saw Neil sitting on the chair beside my bed. You really can sleep. The doctor said you should have woken up earlier. You woke up 3 hours later than expected. I opened my mouth, and my voice was hoarse. Neil. The moment I spoke, tears streamed down my face without hesitation. Neil was immediately at a loss. He was busy getting tissues and asking me where I felt uncomfortable. The black suit he hadn't changed out of and the dark circles under his eyes looked kinda funny. I couldn't help but laugh. After seeing my mood improve, Neil fed me breakfast. After breakfast, he laid me back on the bed. Amara. I know everything. What? When I came, my old man told me. He said he went to see you back then. So that's why you refused me when I asked if you would come with me. He must have talked to you about my future and such. But Amara, I don't have to worry about that now. I've taken control of the Neil family. I shook my head. No. It's because I thought the gap between us was too big. But now. I interrupted him. It's still huge. Neil. After getting into this circle and learning about it, I found that this kind of discrimination is much greater than I imagined. They look down on small families, let alone an ordinary person like me. There was a hint of disappointment in Neil's eyes. I looked at him and said seriously, word by word, but Neil, I want to take a gamble again. I want to bet that I'll win this time. The blue card CAF is right opposite the Civil Affairs Bureau. I threw a divorce agreement at Ernesto. After he signed it, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a divorce certificate. He held the certificate in his hand and asked, on our wedding night, you said I could find anyone I wanted. You could accept other women getting pregnant. But why not Vivian? Why do you have to divorce me? I shook my head with a smile. Sorry. My first love is back. Ernesto asked. What do you mean? I mean, who wouldn't like the genuine article, and would be willing to take a dirty and bratty substitute? Ernesto grabbed my wrist and glared at me. Amara. Say that again. Just as I was about to speak, I was pulled into an embrace. Neil gently pressed my head against his chest. It's not a good habit for President Ernesto to bully women. And can't you understand the literal meaning? Ernesto shouted at him. She's my wife. Neil smiled. Please take a look at the divorce certificate in your hand first. Ernesto was about to do something when Vivian, who rushed over, grabbed his arm. Brother Ernesto. The doctor said we need to go for a prenatal checkup today. Ernesto could only give up, looking at me reluctantly. And I didn't miss the triumphant look on Vivian's face. The news of my divorce from Ernesto quickly spread throughout the high society. My fake friends came to probe me from time to time. After they knew I was really divorced, they didn't even bother to offer symbolic consolation and directly blocked me. However, there were some people in the wives group I joined before who spoke up for me, scolding Vivian for being a shameless mistress. I got busy. There were interest classes and studies, all of which I needed to complete now. And of course, there was Neil, who was almost by my side 24 hours a day. Doesn't your company have anything for you to do? Aren't you afraid of going bankrupt like this? Neil had a nonchalant expression. That would be great. Then I can be with my wife all the time in the future. I shook my head. Being love-struck is really scary. The teacher of our interest class hurt her hand today. I need to help her with a commercial performance at a dinner party tonight. It won't take long. I'll just play the accompaniment for the woman proposing to the man. Neil put the fried sweet and sour pork ribs on the table. Send me the address. I'll pick you up tonight. When I arrived at the dinner party, I found out that it was Vivian's birthday party. When I showed up, everyone looked at me. Even my parents seemed a bit nervous. Vivian started crying as soon as she saw me. Sister, please give your blessing to me and brother Ernesto. You're already divorced. People around were talking non-stop. Vivian is really pitiful. She has such a sister. But since they're already divorced, what's she doing here? It's so annoying. A wealthy woman who was abandoned. I don't know how she has the nerve to come. Vivian was crying so hard that she could barely breathe. My parents were worried and helped her calm down. Sister, please. I don't blame you for hurting my hand 3 years ago. We really love each other. I sneered, since Vivian insisted on provoking me again. Don't blame me for being rude. I slapped her in the face directly. Vivian was stunned by my slap. After she came to her senses, she shouted, "Are you crazy?" Realizing she lost her composure, she covered her face in my mother's arms and said it hurt. I said, "Vivian, why didn't you come back 3 years ago? Was it really just because of your hand?" She immediately looked at me warily. What do you mean? 3 years ago, the old man of Ernesto's family was seriously ill, and Ernesto urgently needed to get married. I wanted to go abroad to find Vivian and ask her to come back and marry him. After all, they seemed to be truly in love in others' eyes. Unexpectedly, when I went abroad, I saw something shocking. Vivian was pregnant with a fully formed belly, chatting and laughing with a strange man. That man was once her piano teacher. Nothing. It's just that the child should be 2 years old by now, right? The whole room gasped. Vivian had a child. Her face turned pale instantly. What child? I don't know. Ernesto looked at her with a dark face. Vivian, is what she said true? Vivian looked at him tearfully. Brother Ernesto, do you believe me and the baby in my belly are her? If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have been deceived by Vivian's acting skills. I pretended not to understand and asked her. I also took pictures. Do you want everyone to see? When I got married to Ernesto before, I joined the chatting group of the wives for socializing. This group basically has people from the whole circle. I posted the pictures in the group. Vivian is really pregnant. A wife exclaimed. Isn't this man Vivian's piano teacher? Yes, having so weird session. Doesn't this piano teacher have a family? Some men were more gossipy. What group is it? Add me in. When Vivian saw this, she immediately threw my phone to the ground. But Ernesto, who was beside her, had already seen the pictures. He shook off Vivian's hand that was holding him. Stay away from me. With a slap, I felt a numbness on my face. My father slapped me. Can't you talk about it at home? You have to post it to embarrass Vivian. I posted it to embarrass her. But didn't she start to embarrass me first? Suddenly, a pair of hands firmly held me. The temperature was so hot that it seemed to melt me. Neil smiled. But there was no warmth in his smile. So, hadn't so bad so. The one being bullied can't fight back? I'm putting it out there today. My future wife can bully whoever she wants. Anyone who has a problem with it can talk to me. Neil. The Neil family will make sure he can never speak again. There was a stir at the party. Oh my God. Amara and Neil. My worldview is shattered. How did they get together? That's the Neil family. Everyone. Quickly listen to the newly posted recording in the group. After listening. Vivian is really despicable. I never saw it before. Ernesto is also an idiot. None of Amara's family members are good. They don't even love their own daughter. After my father slapped me, I posted the recording. Some people are blinded by their own thoughts. Tearing apart the truth is as painful as being lingered to death for them. Then tear it apart. Otherwise, some people will never know what others have gone through. I looked at my father and mother. Their eyes changed from confusion to regret and pain. They looked at me helplessly. Their lips trembling slightly, as if they wanted to say something. I then looked at Vivian, whose face was ashen, and Ernesto, who looked more miserable than death. Neil asked me, "How do you feel?" I let out a breath. A little bit refreshing. Half a year later, I resigned from my job at the interest class and, through my own efforts, was admitted to Capital University. When I was a sophomore, I got married to Neil. Many people came to the wedding. Ernesto was also there. Ernesto handed the wedding gift to me. Amara. I often think about the first year of our marriage. Your eyes seemed to shine when you looked at me. And you would cook delicious meals every day and wait for me to come home. That year, I really wanted to be a good wife and devoted myself wholeheartedly to Ernesto. His eyes were red. I've never told you this. But actually, I was looking forward to coming home every day at that time. My parents had been arguing since I was a child. They either had affairs or were involved with other people outside. You were different from everyone in this circle. But, I continued for him. But you thought I hurt Vivian's hand. And you liked Vivian. Your feelings for her made you feel like you were betraying her. So you distanced yourself from me and found one woman after another. He looked pained. When Neil saw Ernesto, he affectionately put his arm around Ernesto's shoulder. I heard that you and Vivian's child was born. I'll give you a red envelope when I get back. Ernesto's face immediately fell. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Neil did it on purpose. Deliberately hitting where it hurt. Now Vivian and Ernesto have completely broken up, and the Amara family has completely disowned her. I heard that last month. She picked up a pair of scissors and held it to her child's neck to threaten Ernesto. She said she would kill the child if Ernesto didn't marry her. In the end, after the child was rescued, he was sent to a mental hospital by the Ernesto family. After Ernesto left, Neil put away the smile on his face and cursed. What an idiot. He's pretending to be affectionate now. Honey, don't be deceived by him. I gave him the gift. This is the wedding gift from Ernesto. After opening it, we were stunned. It was 15 of the shares of the Ernesto family. Then Neil handed me another thing. Your parents came to me just now and asked me to give this to you. I opened it and saw that it was 60 of the shares of the Amara family. They said as long as you can come back and visit sometime in the future. I closed the share transfer document. Feeling a bit complicated. We'll talk about it later. I'm quite busy recently. At the wedding, the priest asked solemnly, "Does the groom wish to marry the bride?" Neil quickly said, "I do. I do." The priest spoke slowly, which made Neil a little impatient. "Hurry up and ask her." There was a burst of laughter from below. I felt my face burning all the way to my ears. The priest asked me a bit awkwardly, "Does the bride wish to marry the groom?" "I do. The groom may now kiss." Before the priest could finish, Neil stepped forward and lifted my veil. His eyes were moist, and his voice was a bit choked. "Amara. From the time I was 18 until now, I've dreamed of marrying you." I kissed his lips. "Me too." On the big screen in the distance, the photos we took when we were 18 were being played. At 18, Neil shouted to the sky that he would protect Nancy Hi forever. Now he is 25. We got married.